Step out of the vehicle. Hands where I can see them. And don't give me a reason. Those were the first words Micah Wren heard before the door handle was yanked from his grip. The afternoon was ordinary in every way that mattered. 4:17 p.m. on a Thursday in late March, Route 20 along the commercial corridor in Forsyth County, Georgia. A pharmacy on the corner. A dry cleaner's with a hand-lettered "Open" sign. A gas station attendant leaning against the pump island with his arms crossed, watching. The kind of street that had seen 1,000 small transactions. Change given, coffee poured, packages signed for, without incident. The kind of street that, before this afternoon, Micah Wren had driven down without a second thought. He was 22 years old. Second-year student at Howard University School of Law. Home for spring break. Driving a matte black Rolls-Royce Spectre that was titled, registered, and insured in his own name. He had the documentation to prove every one of those facts in the glove compartment, sorted by category, secured with a binder clip. Officer Darren Quill had not asked to see any of it. What Quill had done, what the exterior security camera mounted above the pharmacy entrance would later record in full, was pull his cruiser behind the Spectre at a red light, run the plate, receive a clean return from dispatch, and initiate a traffic stop anyway. No equipment violation, no erratic driving, no call. Just a matte black car worth $250,000 and a young black man behind the wheel. And something in Quill's 14-year career that had never learned to reconcile those two facts without intervention. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, because what this officer did next is something you will not believe. The pullover happened on the shoulder just past the pharmacy. Quill approached on the driver's side with his hand already resting on his belt. Not the radio, the belt. "License and registration," he said, though he had not yet given Micah time to reach for either. Micah kept both hands on the steering wheel, exactly where they had been since the lights appeared behind him. He did not move them without announcing where they were going, not because fear instructed him to be careful, though he was, but because this was a habit, the kind built over years by someone who had learned that deliberate movement was its own form of documentation. "I'm going to reach for my license in my left jacket pocket," he said. Level, even, no qualifying adjectives. Quill studied the interior of the car for a long moment before he answered. His eyes moved across the leather seats, the console, the rearview mirror, the back seat, and back to Micah, the kind of survey that was looking for confirmation of a conclusion already reached, not evidence toward one that had not yet been formed. "Go ahead." Micah produced the license with 2 fingers and extended it through the window. Quill took it, held it at a slight angle in the late afternoon light, and said nothing for several seconds. "Registration." "It's in the glove compartment." A pause. "Open it, slowly." Micah reached across the center console, opened the glove compartment, and retrieved the folder he kept there. A manila envelope, organized by category, secured with a binder clip in the upper left corner. He extended it through the window. Quill did not take it. "Is this your vehicle?" The question was not procedural. It was not part of any checklist or field inquiry protocol. It was the question underneath the question, the one that had actually preceded everything, the one that the plate check had already answered, and that 14 years of conditioning had not allowed Quill to accept. "Yes," Micah said. "The title is in that envelope." Quill still did not take it. What he said next, and what the pharmacy camera would later capture in a 43-degree angle that included both the driver's side window and the officer's left shoulder, was, "Step out of the vehicle. I need you to step out." Micah asked the question he had every procedural right to ask. "On what basis?" Quill's response was to open the door from the outside. That was the moment. Not dramatic, not filmed in slow motion, just a door handle turned by a hand that had decided the conversation was over before it had actually resolved anything, when the afternoon became something else. When the ordinary street, the pharmacy, the gas station attendant, and the binder-clipped folder in the open glove compartment all became part of a record that would matter for a very long time. Micah stepped out. He did not resist. He did not argue. He placed his hands at his sides and waited. because he had been raised by a man who understood, with the clarity of someone who had spent 32 years in institutions that only function if people follow procedure, that the response to a procedural violation was not resistance. It was documentation. Quill walked him to the rear of the Spectre and placed him against the trunk. The handcuffs came out. Micah heard the metal and said quietly and clearly, "I have not been told why I'm being detained. I do not consent to this." "Suspicion of vehicle theft," Quill said. 3 words that had no relationship to the clean plate return sitting in Quill's own cruiser computer. 3 words that had no relationship to the registration in the glove compartment, still open, still visible from where they were standing. 3 words that were, in the literal sense, a thing said into the air on a public street in Forsyth County, Georgia, at 4:22 p.m. on a Thursday, with the pharmacy camera running and a gas station attendant no longer leaning against the pump island, but standing upright, watching. The cuffs clicked into place. Micah Wren stood against the trunk of a car that was legally his, on a public road, with his hands restrained behind him, and said only one more thing before going silent. "That'll be noted." Quill paused, just briefly, a half-second beat, as though the phrase had landed in a register he hadn't expected. Not a threat, not a plea, something more like a notation. The kind of phrase that didn't need to be loud to mean something. The kind of phrase someone uses when they already know what comes next, and they are simply marking the moment for the record. Quill turned back toward his cruiser to call it in, and across the street, above the pharmacy entrance, the exterior camera kept running. What Micah Wren did not know, standing cuffed against his own car in the low March light, was that the next 41 minutes would be measured, documented, and eventually read aloud in a formal complaint filed simultaneously with 3 separate federal and state agencies. He did not know that the folder still open in his glove compartment would become Exhibit A in an internal affairs investigation that would surface things Forsyth County PD had no interest in anyone finding. He did not know that a phone call, 1 minute and 47 seconds, made from the back of a patrol car, would set in motion a sequence of events that no one in that department had adequately prepared for. What he did know was the number, the vehicle identification number of the Rolls-Royce Spectre, all 17 digits, in order, committed to memory the week the title transferred into his name. Not because he had anticipated needing it, but because that was how he had been taught to prepare, thoroughly, without assumption, as though every fact might one day be the fact that mattered. He would use that number in approximately 6 minutes. For now, he stood still. He kept his breathing even. He watched Quill at the cruiser, the radio in hand, and he noted, the way he noted everything, the exact angle of the afternoon light, the running camera, and the empty glove box door still hanging open with the registration folder still inside. The day had not started as anything other than ordinary. The drive back from Atlanta had been uneventful. He had filled the tank at the last exit before the county line, had paid without incident, and had been on Route 20 for less than 10 minutes before the lights appeared in his mirror. In the years to come, Micah would describe the stop's beginning the same way every time he was asked, not with anger, but with precision. The light behind him, the pull to the shoulder, the door opened before the folder was taken. What happened after that, what Sergeant Petra Birch would drive up to confirm, what Lieutenant Fletcher Vane would later attempt to relitigate from behind a department podium, what Deputy Chief Ramona Stell would try to reclassify before anyone asked too many questions, all of it traced back to that single, legible moment. A door opened, a man stepped out, and 3 words were said into the air with no factual basis to support them. Suspicion of vehicle theft. The phrase was still hanging when Quill walked back over with his notepad. Before he could speak, Micah said, "The vehicle identification number is SZZN 0005XNX014783. You can verify it against the plate return you already ran. The registration in the glove compartment will match. You did not ask to see it before placing me in restraints." Quill stopped. He looked at Micah for a moment. Not with recognition exactly, but with the particular discomfort of someone whose checklist has just produced a result they weren't expecting. He said nothing. "I'd like you to read me the plate number on your dispatch record," Micah continued, "and I'd like to know if there is a stolen vehicle report associated with that number." Quill closed his notepad. "That's something we'll sort out at the station," he said. It was not an answer. Both of them knew it was not an answer. And the camera above the pharmacy, still running, documented the silence between the question and the non-answer with the same indifference it documented everything else. The traffic moving past on Route 20, the dry cleaners sign, the afternoon. Micah did not press further. He did not repeat the question. He simply filed it, the refusal, the notepad closing, the phrase, "sort out at the station," in the same internal record where he had already filed the open door, the registration left untouched, and the 3 words that had started this. That'll be noted. A second cruiser arrived 7 minutes after the initial stop. Sergeant Petra Birch stepped out, her uniform pressed in that particular way that announced the person wearing it understood authority as primarily a visual project. She walked a length of the Spectre without speaking, the way someone walks around a car they are appraising rather than a scene they are assessing. She and Quill exchanged a look, brief, lateral, the kind of eye contact that does not need words because it has already happened many times before. An understanding communicated through the simple mechanics of shared professional history. Quill nodded once. Birch turned back toward the Spectre and, without looking at Micah, said, "We'll process him at Central." Micah noted the exact words, noted that Birch had not asked Quill what the stop was for, had not requested the dispatch record, had not looked at the registration folder still visible in the open glove compartment, had simply arrived, absorbed the scene, and added her weight to it. The confirmation was not a review. It was not an evaluation. It was an endorsement given before any facts were examined, because the facts were apparently not what was being decided. A third officer, younger, badge number visible from where Micah stood, arrived in a separate vehicle and positioned himself near the cruiser. Officer Jalen Pruitt, 26 years old, 8 months out of the academy. He did not approach. He did not speak. He stood with one hand resting on his belt and watched in the way that new officers watch things they have been told not to interfere with. Not because they agree, but because they have not yet accumulated enough standing to disagree. His body cam was active, had been active since he arrived on scene. The small indicator light on the upper left of the unit blinked at its standard interval. Micah noticed the light. He did not look at it long, just a single glance, the kind that confirms a fact without drawing attention to the confirmation, and then he looked back at the road. The patrol car's rear seat was where Micah Wren sat for the next 31 minutes. The partition between him and the front of the vehicle was scratched plexiglass. The seat was hard plastic, shaped for compliance rather than comfort. He could hear the radio traffic from the front, dispatch confirming plate returns, other units logging routine activity, and through the rear window, he could see the Spectre still sitting on the shoulder, the glove compartment still open, the folder inside undisturbed. He was entitled to a phone call. He knew the standard. He did not ask for it yet. He was waiting for the station where the request would be formally logged. What he did, in the back of that patrol car on Route 20, was something that required neither a phone nor a legal document. He ran the chain of events from the beginning and sorted them, not emotionally, but structurally, the way you organize case materials before a hearing. The stop without cause. The registration not requested. The door opened without a lawful basis for removal. The question about vehicle ownership answered without acknowledgement. The VIN recitation declined. The second officer arriving and confirming without reviewing. Each element had a classification. Each classification had a statutory reference. He did not have his notes with him, but he did not need them. He had been studying civil procedure and civil rights law for 2 years, not from the position of someone who might one day need it, but from the position of someone who had grown up in a household where the relationship between institutional authority and individual rights was discussed with the same directness that other families discussed the weather. He was, by every measure, calm. Not the calm of someone who had decided nothing mattered, but the calm of someone who had already determined what they were going to do next and understood that impatience would not accelerate it. The car pulled into the Central Division lot at 4:58 p.m. Micah was walked through booking with the procedural briskness of a department that had done it many times. The officer at the intake desk, mid-40s, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, took the personal inventory without comment. Keys, wallet, watch, the notepad Micah kept in his jacket pocket. "One phone call," Micah said before being directed to the holding area. The desk officer wrote something on a form and said, "When we're ready." Micah noted the response. OCGA, Section 42-4-52, required phone access within a reasonable time after booking. He noted the time on the wall clock behind the desk, 5:04 p.m. The call came 17 minutes later. The officer who supervised it stood 3 feet away, arms folded, watching without apparent interest. Micah dialed a number he knew by memory, not scrolling, not searching, just dialing. The call connected in under 2 rings. He spoke for 1 minute and 47 seconds. No preamble, no emotional framing. 3 specific pieces of information in the order that would allow the person on the other end to act efficiently. The address of Central Division, the charge as stated during booking, and a 4-word phrase that the supervising officer would later describe as unremarkable. Micah said, "That's everything for now," and hung up. The supervising officer logged it as a routine personal call with no notable content, filed it accordingly, and moved on. He had listened for the specific markers of something that required follow-up, a threat, a code, a name connected to a pending matter, and had heard none of them. What he had not accounted for was the possibility that the significance of a call was not always in what was said, but in what was already in motion before the call was made. The 4-word phrase had not been a code. It had been a confirmation, a signal that the person receiving it should proceed with what had already been arranged. What, in fact, had been arranged before Micah's car had ever left Atlanta that morning, in the specific sense that a person raised by a man who understood preparation had never operated entirely without contingency. In the holding room, Micah sat on the metal bench, both hands on his knees, palms flat, and looked at the wall. The overhead light buzzed at a frequency that most people found irritating within minutes. He did not find it irritating. He found it a reference point, a sound against which to measure the silence that surrounded it, and in that silence, to think clearly about the 41 minutes that had just passed and the sequence that was about to begin. Somewhere in Forsyth County, above a pharmacy entrance on Route 20, a security camera had been recording since 4:17 p.m. The footage existed. It would not disappear on its own. An Open Records Act request, Georgia's OCGA Section 50-18-70 et sec., required response within 3 business days. The request had a filing deadline of close of business today. The attorney Micah had reached during his one allotted call had a filing system, a fax number, and 17 years of experience with exactly this kind of documentation. And somewhere in the Forsyth County record system, quietly, unexamined, a vehicle identification number that had been flagged for monitoring 6 weeks earlier by an officer who had offered no criminal nexus, no warrant, no explanation. A flag that would surface during discovery. A flag that had been entered into the system in the same week that Micah's enrollment at Howard Law had been published in the university's public newsletter. He did not know about the flag yet, but the folder in the glove compartment was still there. The camera above the pharmacy was still recording. Officer Jalen Pruitt's body cam had been active from first arrival to last, small indicator light blinking at its standard interval, capturing everything. The holding room's overhead light kept buzzing. Micah Wren sat quietly and waited for the next thing to begin. The morning before the stop had been unremarkable in the specific way that retrospect makes ordinary things feel prophetic. Micah had left Atlanta at 11:30 a.m., taking I-75 north before cutting east toward Forsyth County on Route 20. The drive was 40 minutes on a clear day. He had made it a dozen times since starting at Howard. He knew the exits, the speed changes, the stretch of commercial corridor that opened up past the county line. He knew the rhythm of that road the way you know the route between two places that have both, at different points, been home. The Spectre had been his for 8 months. His father had transferred the title on his birthday in July, not as a celebration exactly, more as a practical acknowledgement that Micah was traveling the Atlanta to D.C. corridor with increasing regularity, and that the car he had been driving, a 7-year-old Civic with a slow oil leak, was no longer adequate for the distances involved. Micah had argued briefly against it. The argument had not survived contact with his father's particular brand of quiet insistence, the kind that does not raise its voice because it does not need to. He had accepted the car, added it to his insurance, and driven it with the same attention he brought to everything, carefully, with documentation in order. He filled the tank at a Shell station 3 exits before Forsyth County. He paid with a card. He went inside to buy water and a bag of pretzels, and he noticed, the way he always noticed because he had been trained to notice, the clerk who began tracking his movement through the store from the moment he crossed the threshold. Not the other customers, not the man at the register who had been there before him and remained after. Just Micah, in his navy jacket and khakis, moving down the snack aisle at a pace that was, by any reasonable standard, the pace of someone looking for pretzels. He found the pretzels. He brought them to the register. He paid with the same card he had used at the pump. He said thank you, and he meant it without irony, and he walked back to the car and sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. Not because he was shaken, because he had developed, over years of accumulating similar moments, the practice of pausing, of taking the 30 seconds required to file the experience without letting it generate noise that would carry over into whatever came next. He filed it. He started the car. That was the 3rd time something like that had happened during spring break. The first had been at a Buckhead restaurant the previous Saturday, when the host had spent an unusual amount of time finding the reservation that was, in fact, exactly where reservations are kept. The second had been a parking garage in downtown Atlanta on Monday, when a security guard had followed Micah from the elevator to his car without explanation, then radioed something in after Micah pulled out that had nothing to do with any posted policy or visible incident. 3 incidents in a week, none of them individually remarkable enough to report, none of them legally actionable on their own, each of them adding a single data point to a pattern that Micah tracked not with bitterness, but with the systematic attention of someone studying for an exam on a subject the world had decided he needed to pass, regardless of whether he had enrolled. He was 22. He had been taking this exam for as long as he could remember. He was, by this point, very good at it. The lights appeared in his mirror at 4:14 p.m. Red and blue, cycling in the standard pattern, close enough that they had clearly been following for at least a block before activating. Micah checked his speed, 3 miles under the limit. He checked his mirrors. He used his turn signal for a full 4 seconds before pulling to the shoulder. He brought the car to a complete stop, set the parking brake, and placed both hands at the 10 and 2 position on the steering wheel, where they remained until he heard footsteps approaching on the driver's side. He noted the time, 4:16 p.m. The folder in the glove compartment had 4 sections, organized with labeled tabs. The first contained the vehicle registration, the title documentation, and the insurance card. The second held his proof of address and the bill of sale. The third was a running log of maintenance records, organized chronologically from the date of purchase. The fourth, the one that Micah had added 3 months into owning the car after the second time he had been stopped while driving it, held a 1-page summary of Georgia traffic stop rights, printed from the Georgia Legal Aid website, dated and signed at the bottom with the date he had added it. He had not told his father about that 4th section. His father would have understood it completely, which was exactly why telling him felt unnecessary. Quill arrived at the window, late 30s, broad across the shoulders with the slightly compressed posture of someone who has worn body armor for so many years that the adjustment has become structural. His badge caught the afternoon light when he angled slightly forward to address the window. "License and registration," he said. Micah provided the license immediately. 2 fingers, announced before movement, exactly as described earlier. He extended the glove compartment folder with his other hand. Quill took the license. He did not take the folder. "Is this your vehicle?" There it was, the question under the question. "Yes, the title is in the folder." Quill looked at the car again. The long, unhurried survey that took in the interior, the seats, the console, the rear-view mirror, the empty back seat. His expression was not hostile exactly. It was something quieter and, in its own way, more durable than hostility. It was the expression of a man who had already made a decision and was now performing the motions of deliberation. "Step out of the vehicle, hands where I can see them, and don't give me a reason." The sentence structure was significant in a way that most people would not have caught. Not "sir," not "please." And the end, the quiet addition of "don't give me a reason," was not a legal instruction. It was a warning directed at a conclusion that had not yet been stated, which was the most reliable indicator that the conclusion was already fixed. Micah asked the procedural question he had every right to ask. Quill opened the door. What followed has already been described. The walk to the rear of the vehicle, the handcuffs, the phrase "suspicion of vehicle theft," delivered without a factual basis and without any attempt to examine the registration folder that was, at that moment, sitting in the open glove compartment less than 4 feet away. What has not yet been described is what Micah observed during the 90 seconds between stepping out of the car and being placed against the trunk. He observed the angle of the pharmacy camera. He assessed its coverage, a 45-degree field that would include the driver's side of the Spectre and the space between the vehicle and Quill's cruiser. He observed the gas station attendant, now on his feet, watching. He observed a woman exiting the dry cleaners who stopped on the sidewalk when she registered what she was seeing. He noted the timestamp on the Route 20 signage visible from his position, a county road marker that would anchor the location independently of the police report. He was thorough, not because this moment was exceptional in kind, but because he had learned that the moments that feel ordinary, that feel like just another encounter, just another stop, just another question asked about just another car, were precisely the moments that required the most careful attention. Because those were the moments that later, in a hearing room or a courtroom or an IA investigator's office, someone would attempt to reduce to nothing, would describe as routine, would suggest had been misremembered, misunderstood, or dramatized. Micah did not intend to be misremembered. At 4:22 p.m., with his hands cuffed behind him and his car's registration folder sitting untouched in the open glove compartment, he recited the vehicle identification number, all 17 characters, in sequence, without hesitation. Then he asked Quill to compare it against the plate return. Quill refused. He asked whether there was an active stolen vehicle report associated with the VIN. Quill closed his notepad. "That'll be noted," Micah said. The phrase was not dramatic. It was not intended to be dramatic. It was the kind of thing said when you have decided that the record is more important than the argument, when you understand that the person across from you is not open to persuasion, but that the documentation of their refusal is itself the goal. Quill paused for exactly the amount of time it takes to register a phrase and not know what to do with it. Then he went back to his cruiser. Sergeant Petra Birch arrived at 4:29 p.m. This was not a response time. 7 minutes from an initial stop call to a second supervisor's presence on scene for a vehicle stop that had already produced a clean plate return was not a response time. It was a deployment time. The distinction mattered, and Micah noted it. Birch was 49 years old, with 23 years on the department and the specific kind of confidence that belongs to people who have learned to navigate institutional structures by managing the perception of situations rather than the substance of them. She walked the length of the Spectre without examining the open glove compartment, exchanged the lateral look with Quill that communicated what it communicated, and announced the destination. "We'll process him at Central." No question asked, no registration reviewed, no inquiry made into what the dispatch record showed or whether the stop had a factual basis. Just the weight of a second uniform added to the scene, and a destination announced, and the shared understanding between two people who had worked the same department long enough to know that the appearance of procedure could stand in for procedure itself, at least long enough to get past the shoulder of the road. Officer Jalen Pruitt positioned his vehicle near the cruiser and stood without speaking. He was young enough that his face still showed what it was feeling, which was something in the vicinity of discomfort. Not the sharp kind that produces action, but the low-grade kind that produces stillness. He was calculating, the way young officers calculate when they are standing at the intersection of what they have been trained to do and what they are watching happen, and the two do not match. He had been on the job for 8 months. He had not yet accumulated the standing to disagree out loud. But his body cam was active. The indicator light blinked at its standard interval, green, then dark, then green, and it recorded everything within its field of view with the systematic indifference of a machine that does not distinguish between what matters and what doesn't, because it has not been built to make that distinction. It records, that is all, and sometimes that is everything. Micah was placed in the rear of Quill's cruiser at 4:24 p.m. He watched through the scratched plexiglass as Birch and Quill spoke beside the Spectre. He could not hear the conversation. He could read its shape, the angle of their bodies, the brief gestures, the moment when Birch looked at the open glove compartment and then looked away. Not because she missed it, because she had decided it did not require engagement. The folder sat there for another 6 minutes before Quill finally reached in and collected it as part of the vehicle inventory. He did not open it at the scene. He bagged it. The bag was labeled with the case number and the timestamp, 4:30 p.m. The registration, the title, and the insurance card, all exactly where they had been since before the stop, went into the bag with everything else and made the trip to Central Division in the trunk of Quill's cruiser. By the time the cruiser pulled out of the shoulder and onto Route 20, Micah had been sitting in the rear seat for 11 minutes. The afternoon light had shifted from that flat, even quality that characterizes mid-afternoon to the first suggestion of late-day gold. The gas station attendant was back at the pump island. The woman from the dry cleaners had gone inside. The pharmacy camera kept running. At Central Division, the intake desk officer logged Micah Wren at 5:04 p.m. The charge on the booking sheet read, "Suspicion of vehicle theft." No supporting documentation had been generated for this charge. The dispatch record showing a clean plate return had not been attached to the booking file. These were the kinds of details that became significant later, not immediately, but in the methodical, accumulative way that evidence builds in the period between an incident and its formal examination. Micah made his call at 5:21 p.m. 1 minute and 47 seconds. 3 pieces of information. 4 words at the end. He hung up. He was directed to the holding room. He sat on the bench. He placed both hands on his knees. He looked at the wall. The overhead light buzzed. Outside, on Route 20, a pharmacy camera continued to run. A body cam footage file sat on a department server. A glove compartment folder, bagged and tagged, sat in an evidence room with all its contents intact and unread. An Open Records Act request was at that moment being drafted by an attorney who had been waiting for a call that contained exactly those 3 pieces of information. The sequence had been set, not with noise, not with confrontation, with procedure, the kind that runs in one direction when people follow it correctly, and in a different direction entirely when they don't. Micah Wren understood which direction this one was heading. He waited. The attorney's name was Calvin Reese. He had practiced civil rights law in Georgia for 17 years, had litigated 11 Open Records Act disputes, and had never once failed to receive a response within statutory deadline. He filed the request at 4:58 p.m., 3 minutes before close of business on Thursday, to the Forsyth County Sheriff's Communications Office, the pharmacy's property management company, and the Forsyth County PD Records Division. Georgia's OCGA Section 50-18-70 et sec. Granted him 72 hours. He asked for all available footage from cameras facing Route 20 between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. on that date, including any department body cam recordings associated with the case number issued at Central Division for that evening's booking. He did not explain why. He did not need to. By Friday afternoon, he had confirmations of receipt. By Saturday, the pharmacy's property management company, which handled a regional chain with no particular loyalty to any law enforcement department, had produced its footage within 24 hours, ahead of schedule. The file was 47 minutes of compressed video from a fixed exterior camera positioned above the entrance at a 43-degree angle. The timestamp began at 4:15 p.m. Reese reviewed it that evening. He watched it twice. Then he prepared a summary, attached the footage file, and sent it by encrypted transfer to two recipients, Micah Wren and a secure address Micah had specified during the 1 minute and 47 seconds. The summary had 4 sentences. The footage showed Officer Darren Quill approaching a stopped vehicle, requesting the license, and then opening the driver's side door from the exterior without any document being produced or examined. It showed a young black man placing his hands on the trunk and making no movement that could be characterized as threatening. It showed Sergeant Petra Birch arriving, walking the perimeter of the vehicle, and speaking briefly with Officer Quill without approaching the open glove compartment visible at the footage's left edge. And it showed Officer Jalen Pruitt standing at the periphery of the scene with a bodycam unit showing an active status indicator throughout. The glove compartment folder was visible in the footage for the full duration of Micah's time on the shoulder, from the moment Quill opened the door until Quill finally bagged it at 4:30 p.m. 14 minutes during which the registration, title, and insurance documentation sat untouched and unread in plain sight. Reese filed the civil rights complaint under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 on Saturday morning. He noted the Fourth Amendment violation, the warrantless seizure without probable cause, and the 14th Amendment equal protection dimension. He attached the footage as Exhibit A. He noted the pending request for Officer Pruitt's bodycam recording under the county's own evidence retention policy and OCGA Section 17-4-95. He sent copies to the Forsyth County Public Defender's Office, the county clerk, and the Georgia Attorney General's Civil Rights Division. Then he drove to Central Division and secured Micah's release at 11:42 a.m. on Saturday. The charge on the booking sheet, suspicion of vehicle theft, had not produced a formal complaint from the Forsyth County DA's office because the DA's office had not been contacted about the arrest. The charge was, in the statutory sense, an officer's detention statement, not a filed charge. Without DA involvement, there was nothing to hold Micah on past the constitutionally permissible window. Micah signed his property receipt at 11:49. Keys, wallet, watch, the notepad from his jacket pocket. He checked the notepad's pages. Nothing had been added or removed. Clipped his pen back to the cover and followed Reese to the parking lot without speaking until they were outside. "The folder," Micah said, "listed as vehicle inventory. Still in evidence. We'll get it back through the property return process." Reese handed him a copy of the complaint. "The footage is strong." Micah looked at the document for a moment. He did not look relieved. He looked the way someone looks who had already calculated the outcome and was now verifying that the calculation had been correct. "What's Quill's history?" Reese had been expecting the question. 14 years on the department, 2 prior complaints for pretextual stops, both marked unfounded. 1 complaint of excessive force, also unfounded. He received a department commendation in 2022. Approved by whom? Deputy Chief Ramona Stell. Micah filed that away. He said nothing else about it. They drove back toward Atlanta in Reese's car while the Spectre remained in the Forsyth County impound lot, which was where vehicles went after the kind of stop that produced no charge but maintained the appearance of procedure. That was Saturday. What happened between Saturday and Thursday of the following week occurred in the specific register of institutional management, the space where departments absorb problems before they become public. Lieutenant Fletcher Vane was Forsyth County PD's public information officer. He had a law enforcement background. 12 years on the job before a shoulder injury moved him to administrative work. And he managed the department's external communications with the competence of someone who had learned that the appearance of transparency and actual transparency were 2 different instruments to be deployed selectively. He had reviewed the footage himself by Saturday afternoon and had reached a professional conclusion. This was not the kind of matter that resolved itself quietly. He drafted a statement. The statement used the phrase, "officer discretion," 3 times, and the phrase, "pending internal review," twice. It acknowledged that a stop had been made and a detention had occurred, described Quill's actions as consistent with reasonable suspicion under the circumstances, and noted that the department had initiated a voluntary internal review to ensure that all proper procedures had been followed. It did not acknowledge the footage. It did not acknowledge that the registration had gone unexamined for 14 minutes. It positioned the matter as routine and the response as proactive. Vane released the statement Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, Simone Park had it. Simone Park worked for the Forsyth County Courier, covering municipal government and law enforcement with the particular intensity of a reporter who had spent 7 years watching institutions describe themselves. She was 31 years old, thorough, and had learned that the most useful questions were the ones that asked about timing rather than substance. She did not call Vane's public information line. She called the pharmacy's property management company and confirmed that the footage had been produced under the Open Records Act request. She confirmed the filing with the county clerk. She obtained a copy of Reese's civil rights complaint. She wrote a story. The story ran Tuesday. It ran without inflammatory language. It ran without characterization. It ran with the footage timestamp, the case number, the charge as written on the booking sheet, and the 4-sentence summary of what the exterior camera had recorded. It ran with Vane's Monday statement reproduced in full, and directly below it the following line. The footage obtained by this reporter shows that no documentation was requested from the driver before the vehicle door was opened and the driver was removed from the vehicle. The story also included, in its 14th paragraph, a single line sourced to a county records search. Vehicle identification number SZN0005XNX014783 had been flagged in a law enforcement monitoring database 6 weeks prior to the stop. No stolen vehicle report, no active warrant, and no criminal nexus was associated with the flag at the time of its entry or at the time of the stop. That paragraph had not been in Reese's complaint. Simone had found it on her own, working through the county records database on Sunday evening, cross-referencing the VIN against flag entries without a particularly specific theory of what she might find. She found it anyway. She ran it in the 14th paragraph because she was a reporter, not a prosecutor, and because what she had was a fact, not yet a pattern. The story ran. The department issued no response to the 14th paragraph. State Representative Edmund Causey appeared on a regional radio program Tuesday afternoon. He had not read the story's 14th paragraph before going on air, or had read it and decided the best posture was momentum into the original position rather than adjustment. He said that the stop, from what he had reviewed, was consistent with proper officer discretion. He said that Forsyth County's law enforcement officers operated with professionalism and community commitment. He said specifically that law-abiding citizens had nothing to fear from lawful traffic enforcement. He was on air for 11 minutes. No one asked him about the monitoring database flag. By Wednesday, Internal Affairs investigator Hazel Drummond had received a referral. The referral came not from within the department, but from the Georgia Attorney General's Civil Rights Division, which had received Reese's complaint and had begun its own preliminary assessment. Drummond was 44 years old, with 19 years in law enforcement and 6 in internal affairs, and she had the specific kind of professional temperament that this work either produced or eliminated: patient, procedure-oriented, and constitutionally skeptical of departmental assurances. She reviewed the footage on Wednesday morning. She noted the 14-minute window. She noted the database flag. She pulled Quill's prior complaint history and found the pattern Reese had described. 2 unfounded findings on pretextual stop complaints, both processed during periods when the reviewing supervisor's chain of command ran through the same directorial office. She requested Pruitt's bodycam footage through the department's internal evidence system on Wednesday afternoon. The request went to the Evidence Control Unit. It was logged at 3:14 p.m. It was routed to the Evidence Control Supervisor. The supervisor sent it upward, which was not standard procedure for a bodycam footage request, but which was, in this department, a practiced response to requests that carried potential liability implications. It reached Deputy Chief Stell's office by 4 p.m. Stell reviewed the routing slip on Thursday morning. She did not review the footage. What she did instead was initiate a reclassification of the incident file from misconduct complaint pending investigation to procedural review, voluntary compliance track. The distinction was administrative but consequential. Under the voluntary compliance track, the investigation timeline extended, the evidentiary requirements changed, and the departmental obligation to cooperate with the AG referral narrowed considerably. She had done this before. The mechanism was known to her, known to the department's union counsel, and, as of Thursday morning, known to Hazel Drummond, who received the reclassification notice at 10:51 a.m. and immediately called the AG's Civil Rights Division to report it. What Stell did not know was that her reclassification memo, sent through the internal system at 8:43 a.m. Thursday, had been automatically copied to a department records archive that was accessible under a pending FOIA request already in queue. The copy existed because of a systems update 3 months earlier that had extended automatic archiving to administrative memos of this classification type. The person who had submitted the original FOIA request was Calvin Reese. The document trail was already building itself. Stell had simply added to it. The physical confrontation happened on Friday. Micah had returned to Forsyth County for one reason. Calvin Reese's office was there, and they had a meeting scheduled to review the property return paperwork for the Spectre, which had been released from impound on Thursday after Reese filed the appropriate motion. Micah arrived at the impound facility at 8:45 a.m., completed the paperwork, and retrieved the car. He drove to Reese's office on Mulberry Street, parked on the street, and was walking toward the entrance when Officer Darren Quill stepped out of a vehicle parked 2 spaces ahead. This was not coincidence. Quill had known Reese's office address from the civil rights complaint filing, which was public record. He had known Micah's schedule from the impound release notification, which ran through the department's own administrative system. He had, as would be established later through a review of his personal vehicle's GPS log, parked on Mulberry Street at 7:50 a.m. What he said when he stepped out of the vehicle was not a threat, technically. It was a question. "Still driving that car?" Micah stopped walking. He did not respond. "That's a lot of trouble for a borrowed vehicle," Quill said. He had his hands in his jacket pockets. Off duty, no uniform. "You might want to think about whether any of this is worth it." Micah looked at him. He noted the time on his phone, which he had raised casually to check a message that did not exist, and the GPS timestamp that the phone's activity log would record. He noted the vehicle behind Quill, the plate, the parking position. He noted that Quill had spoken loud enough to be heard, but not loud enough to be characterized as a public disturbance. "I'd like you to step away from my path," Micah said. Quill took 1 step to the side, not fully clear. A half step, technically compliance while maintaining territorial pressure. 14 years of patrol had given him a calibrated sense of how close was close enough to matter without being close enough to justify a complaint. Micah walked past him without altering his pace. He entered Reese's building, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and sat down in the waiting area. He took out his phone and sent Reese a text. 4 sentences describing what had just happened, the time, the plate number, and Quill's exact words. Then he drafted a supplemental statement for the civil rights file, dated and time-stamped, and emailed it to Reese's secure address. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. At its end, Reese had a new exhibit for the complaint file, a documented post-complaint intimidation attempt, which implicated 18 U.S.C. Section 1512, obstruction through intimidation of a civil litigant. The civil rights complaint now had 2 statutory anchors instead of 1. It was during the meeting's final minutes that Reese mentioned the call he had received the previous afternoon. Not from the department, not from the AG's office. from General Solomon Wren's aide-de-camp, who had reached Reese's office at 2:47 p.m. on Thursday and communicated in terms that were precise and unhurried that the general intended to be in Forsyth County the following morning and wished to coordinate timing with the attorney. Reese had said he would pass the information to Micah. He was doing that now. Micah set down the property return copy he had been reviewing. He said nothing for a moment. "He doesn't need to come," Micah said. "That's not what I'm hearing," Reese said. What happened on Friday morning at 11:17 a.m. was witnessed by Hazel Drummond, who had been in the Forsyth County PD Administrative Building for a scheduled evidence review session, and by Simone Park, who had been in the parking lot across the street for reasons that were professional and entirely her own. A black government Suburban with federal plates stopped at the curb in front of the Central Division building. Two vehicles followed, a dark sedan and a second Suburban, both with matching plates. The doors opened in a sequence that suggested coordination without being theatrical about it. An aide stepped out of the first vehicle. Then Colonel Adeze Obi, JAG Corps, full-dress uniform, stepped out of the second. And then General Solomon Wren stepped out of the first Suburban and stood on the sidewalk in front of Forsyth County PD's Central Division building, in full Army dress uniform, 4 stars on each shoulder, every decoration in its proper place, and said nothing. He did not need to say anything yet. His presence was itself a communication, and it was received by the duty sergeant at the front desk, who happened to be standing near the window, by the parking lot attendant who stopped mid-motion with a set of keys in his hand, and by Simone Park, who had her phone out and was making notes with the contained focus of someone who understood that what she was watching was going to require very careful language to describe accurately. Colonel Obi entered the building first. She asked for the watch commander by name. She introduced herself by rank and name, produced her JAG identification, and placed on the duty counter a single document, a formal complaint and notification of legal action, filed simultaneously, as she explained in 4 economical sentences, with the Department of Defense Inspector General, the Georgia Attorney General's Civil Rights Division, and the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Section under 34 U.S.C. Section 12601. The watch commander arrived 2 minutes later. Colonel Obi handed him the document and said, "General Wren would like his son released from any outstanding administrative holds, and he would like confirmation that no further contact will be initiated with Micah Marcus Wren by any officer of this department outside of properly noticed legal proceedings." The watch commander said there were no outstanding holds. Micah had been released Saturday morning. Obi nodded once. Then the general would like a moment. General Solomon Wren entered the building at 11:22 a.m. He was 58 years old, 6 feet 1 inch, and had the bearing of someone for whom the question of authority had been settled long ago by way of 32 years of documented service rather than by performance of it. He did not raise his voice. He did not arrive with speeches. He stood in the Central Division lobby and addressed the watch commander in the same tone he used in the Pentagon, direct, unhurried, and with the quality of someone who had decided well in advance of this moment exactly what needed to be said and what did not. "My son's name is Micah Marcus Wren," he said. "On a Thursday afternoon on a public road in this county, he was removed from his own vehicle, restrained without cause, and held for 16 hours on a charge that your own dispatch record had already refuted before the restraints were applied. That is documented. It is on record, and it is why the people accompanying me this morning filed the complaint that your watch commander is now holding." He paused for exactly as long as it took the watch commander to understand that the pause was not a hesitation. "I am not here to ask for anything. I am here because my son is 22 years old, and what happened to him on that road is the same thing that has happened to people in this county who do not have a father who can walk into this building. That is what the investigation that was filed this morning is about. Not me, not my rank, not the vehicle, the pattern." He held eye contact with the watch commander for a moment. Then he turned, walked back out to the sidewalk, got into the Suburban, and the three-vehicle convoy moved away from the curb at a pace that was neither hurried nor lingering. Hazel Drummond, watching from an interior window, wrote 2 words in her case notebook: pattern confirmed. Simone Park wrote a story that ran that afternoon. She described what she had witnessed, the document Colonel Obie had delivered, the statutory references, and the general's statement as she had heard it from the parking lot. She did not characterize the general's rank as the point of the story. She understood, as a journalist who covered institutions, that the point was in the last 3 words of what he had said. The pattern. The reclassification Stell had attempted on Thursday was reversed by the AG's office on Monday morning. The pattern or practice investigation was formally opened that same day. The DOJ confirmed receipt of the complaint and referral on the following Wednesday. A preliminary inquiry case number was issued. No timeline for findings was committed to because federal pattern or practice investigations do not work on timelines that serve the impatience of anyone observing them. They work on the accumulation of documentation, the analysis of data sets spanning years, and the comparison of individual incidents to aggregate patterns, which is slow, deliberate, and, when it concludes, very difficult to dismiss. The IA panel decision came 3 weeks later. Quill on administrative leave without pay, Birch suspended 60 days, Stell under supervisory review. No terminations, no criminal charges at that stage. Administrative accountability operating at its designed pace, which was not fast and was not clean, but which was, unlike nothing, something. What remained open as of the filing of the last document in Reese's case log for that period, the monitoring database flag, whose originating badge number pointed to a blank field in the department's own reissuance record, and a calendar entry in Stell's subpoenaed schedule. 2 days before the flag was created, a lunch meeting, the companion listed only as EC, 2 letters, an unanswered question. The kind of thread that either ends in a document that explains it or does not end at all, that persists in a case file, noted, unresolved, carrying the particular weight of things that are almost certainly not coincidence, but cannot yet be proven to be anything else. The AG's investigators had the calendar. They had the badge record. Whether they would find what connected them, and when, and whether that finding would produce accountability of the kind that reached past administrative leave into something more durable, that was a question that the footage could not answer, and that the case number could not answer, and that Micah Wren, back at Howard Law on a Monday, reading civil procedure with the attention of someone who now understood what the statutes were for, had decided to leave to the process he had set in motion. He had said it would be noted. The record agreed. End. Escalation expansion. The Tuesday after the story ran, Fletcher Vane held a press availability at department headquarters. He had prepared remarks which ran to approximately 4 minutes, and he delivered them with the steady cadence of someone who had been trained to project calm when projecting calm was itself the strategy. He described the department's internal review as thorough and ongoing. He noted that Officer Quill had a 14-year record of service that included 2 meritorious conduct citations. He described the stop as having been initiated within the framework of established field discretion protocols. He did not take questions. When 2 reporters called out anyway, one of them Simone Park, he smiled in the direction of the camera pool and said that the department would release additional information as the internal review progressed. The phrase, established field discretion protocols, ran in 3 separate follow-up stories. Each time it was followed by a description of what the pharmacy footage actually showed. Vane's challenge to Micah, and it functioned as a challenge even if it was conducted through a department statement rather than direct confrontation, was the technical challenger's version of pressure, not physical, not social, but procedural. The attempt to reframe what had happened in language precise enough to seem authoritative while remaining vague enough to obscure the documented facts. Micah read the press availability transcript, which Reese forwarded to him by email on Tuesday evening. He did not respond to it publicly. He sent Reese 3 annotations. Specific lines from the transcript cross-referenced with the footage timestamps and the dispatch record, and went back to his coursework. The response, when it came, was not from Micah. It was from the record. Pruitt's bodycam footage was eventually produced, after Drummond issued a formal internal evidence request that Stell's reclassification attempt had delayed but not ultimately prevented. The footage, authenticated by badge number 4119, the date of recording, and the case number from the original booking file, showed the stop from a different angle than the pharmacy camera, lower, closer, positioned at the perimeter of the scene. It showed Quill approaching Micah's window. It showed the license being taken. It showed the folder extended through the window and not taken. It showed the door being opened. And it showed, in the audio track, Quill's words when Micah recited the VIN. A single syllable, unintelligible but present in the recording as a response, followed by the sound of a notepad closing. Drummond added the footage to the IA file as Exhibit C. The dispatch record was Exhibit B, the pharmacy footage Exhibit A. Together, the three items produced a timeline that made the department's characterization of the stop as routine increasingly difficult to maintain in any proceeding where the evidence could be directly examined. Reese subpoenaed Quill's field activity log for the 6 months prior to the stop, which was his right under OCGA Section 17-4-95. The log showed 23 stops on Route 20 during that period. 17 involved vehicles that dispatch had returned clean before the stop progressed to document review. Of those 17, 14 involved drivers who, based on the booking photos when charges had been filed or the descriptive fields in the activity reports when they had not, were identifiable as black. The remaining 3 were not so identifiable. The number sat in Reese's file without commentary, because numbers do not need commentary when they are specific enough. Birch's disciplinary hearing, separate from Quill's IA review, produced a moment that Hazel Drummond later described in her investigative notes as the most illuminating 2 minutes of the entire proceeding. Birch's attorney had argued during the session's first hour that Birch's role had been supervisory and confirmatory, that she had arrived on scene after the initial contact, had assessed the situation as presented to her by Quill, and had made a command decision to proceed to processing based on Quill's representation of the facts. The argument was professionally constructed. It created distance between Birch and the stop's initial procedural failure. Then Drummond produced the bodycam audio. Birch had been standing within 4 feet of the open glove compartment when she made her assessment. The body cam captured it. Her words, "He's fine, it's just the car," were recorded at timestamp 14:03, which was 9 minutes after Quill's initial approach and 5 minutes before the folder was bagged. She had been close enough to read the tabs on the folder's organizational sections. She had chosen not to. "He's fine, it's just the car," was 7 words, and those 7 words were now Exhibit D. Birch's attorney requested a recess following that exhibit's presentation. The recess lasted 20 minutes. When the hearing resumed, the attorney indicated that his client wished to provide a supplemental statement. The statement said, in its relevant portion, that Birch had made an error in judgment, that she had relied on Quill's characterization of the stop without independently verifying the documentation, and that she recognized this as a failure of supervisory protocol. It did not use the word apology. It did not explain the specific words on the audio recording. It was a statement calibrated to acknowledge a procedural failure while attributing it to circumstance rather than intent. The panel received it. The suspension held. 60 days without pay, pending the full IA investigation's conclusion. Social pressure, the second escalation tier, had its own register in the story. Vane's press management strategy had been aimed not at Micah directly. Micah had said nothing public, had given no interviews, had maintained the specific silence of someone letting documentation speak, but at the general perception of what the stop represented. If the stop could be successfully framed as an isolated procedural irregularity being responsibly addressed by a self-correcting institution, the broader question of pattern was harder to raise. The 14th paragraph of Simone's story had disrupted that framing. The general's statement on Friday morning had disrupted it again, specifically by naming the pattern explicitly and associating it with a federal complaint rather than a personal grievance. Causey's radio appearance on Tuesday was the authority skeptic's play, the institutional voice of legitimization arriving after the foundational narrative had already been challenged, attempting to restore the prior framing through the weight of political credibility. It did not work. And it did not work for a reason that Causey had not fully calculated. His credibility in this instance was contingent on the audience not having seen the footage. By Tuesday, a significant portion of his constituents had. The footage was not sensational. It was precisely the opposite. It was ordinary, quiet, 43 degrees of compressed video showing a folder sitting untouched in a glove compartment for 14 minutes while a young man stood against his own trunk with his hands restrained. That ordinariness was, in its own way, more durable than any dramatic image would have been. It required no interpretation. It simply showed what had happened and let the viewer apply the officer discretion framing themselves. Most viewers did not find the framing convincing. Causey received a significant volume of constituent correspondence in the week following the story's publication. His office released no further statements. What happened in the 6 weeks following the IA panel decision was institutional in the specific sense that means conducted through proper channels, documented in proper format, moving at the pace that proper channels move. The AG's Pattern or Practice Inquiry Team, 2 attorneys from the Civil Rights Division, 1 statistical analyst, and a retired law enforcement supervisor serving as subject matter expert, began reviewing Forsyth County PD's stop data for the preceding 5 years. They requested the field activity logs for all officers working the Route 20 corridor. They requested the monitoring database records for the same period, looking for entries with no associated criminal nexus, no warrant, and no incident report. They found 27 such entries in 5 years. They cross-referenced those entries with the demographic characteristics of the associated vehicle registrants. They did not release preliminary findings. They documented. The documentation accumulated. The machinery turned at the pace federal machinery turns, which is not satisfying to observe in real time, but which is, in the accumulated weight of what it produces, very difficult to dismiss. Micah's father called him on a Sunday evening, approximately 5 weeks after the Friday morning at Central Division. It was not an unusual call in its format, weekly check-in, the kind that had been a standing practice since Micah left for Howard. What was unusual was that General Solomon Wren, who did not typically discuss his own actions after taking them, mentioned the Friday morning once, briefly, and only to say one thing. "I want you to know I wasn't there for the rank," he said. "I was there because you were right." Micah said, "I know." There was a pause, the kind that passes between 2 people who understand the same things and have learned, through the same kind of careful accumulation, not to require more words than a thing actually needs. "How's the coursework?" his father asked. "Civil procedure," Micah said. "Section 1983. "Good material," his father said. It was, in the context of everything that had happened and everything still underway, the closest either of them came to something that could be called a conclusion. Not because the story had concluded, it had not, and both of them knew it, but because some recognitions arrive quietly, between the 2 people who already understand what they mean, in the pause between one sentence and the next. The badge number trail was still open. The initials on Stell's calendar still had no confirmed identity behind them. The pattern or practice investigation was in its early documentation phase. Quill was on leave, not terminated. Stell was under review, not charged. Causey had gone quiet, not accountable. The system was moving, not transformed. But the stop was on record. The footage existed. The complaint was filed. The investigation was open. The case number was real. And somewhere in the Forsyth County record system, a monitoring flag for a vehicle identification number entered without cause, without warrant, and without explanation sat in a database that federal investigators were now authorized to access, waiting for someone to find the blank name field and ask the question it implied. The work continued. It had always been continuing, long before any single incident made it visible. It would continue long after the specific incident at 4:16 p.m. on a Thursday on Route 20 in Forsyth County receded into the background of the case file where it had been properly placed. The question the blank name field asked was simple. The answer was not yet simple, but the question had been asked, formally, in a proceeding with a case number and a legal record, and questions asked in those terms do not simply go away. They wait. They accumulate. And eventually, with enough documentation around them, they get answered. Micah Wren had always understood that. He had learned it from a man who spent 32 years building something that lasted not because it was loud, but because it was right, and it was documented, and it was pursued with the specific patience that distinguishes the people who actually change things from the people who only want credit for trying. He drove the Spectre back to D.C., both hands on the wheel. Documentation in the glove compartment, organized by tab. The work continued. Officer Darren Quill was placed on administrative leave. Not fired, not charged, not the kind of accountability that feels like justice from the outside. Sergeant Petra Birch lost 60 days of pay and kept her badge. Deputy Chief Ramona Stell received a supervisory review and kept her office. The system moved the way systems move. Measured, procedural, and short of everything that would look like enough. But here is what that framing misses. A monitoring database flag, entered without cause, without warrant, without a criminal nexus, pointed to a badge number that led nowhere, to a blank name field, to a question that a federal investigation is now required to answer. The machinery is moving. It did not move because the car was expensive. It moved because a 22-year-old man knew his rights, documented his experience with precision, made one phone call in under 2 minutes, and refused to let the record go uncontested. What about the people who do not have a father with 4 stars on his shoulders? What about the people who drive old cars on the same roads, who get pulled over, who get the same questions, who face the same 14-minute silence while their paperwork sits unread, and have no one to call? Their experience of that stop does not change because no general steps out of a Suburban. The stop is the same stop. The question is whether the system responds to it the same way. That is the question worth sitting with. That is what the comment section is for. If this story made you think about who the system protects and who it makes prove themselves, drop that below. And if you believe that documentation, procedure, and persistence matter even when power does not show up in a uniform to back you, hit subscribe. Because that is what every story on this channel is about. Every story on this channel is about one thing: the moment truth finally catches up. And it always does.